Gestão do Conhecimento, Capital Intelectual e Ativos Intangíveis. Neste momento, convidamos para compor a mesa o professor Emílio Francischetti, pró-reitor de pós-graduação e pesquisa, representando o magnífico reitor da Unigranrio, o professor Arodi Cordeiro Erdi. Convidamos também a professora Sônia Regina Mendes, pró-reitora comunitária e de extensão da Universidade Unigranrio. Convidamos a professora Virgínia Geneliu, diretora de pesquisa e iniciação científica da Universidade Unigranrio. Convidamos o professor Rui Otávio Andrade, coordenador do programa de pós-graduação em administração. Convidamos também o professor José Francisco Rezende, professor adjunto do PPGA e organizador deste colóquio. Neste momento, convido o professor Emílio Francischetti para o pronunciamento de abertura do evento.
Professora Sônia, a professora Virgínia, a professor Rui Andrade, meu caro amigo João Francisco de Carvalho Rezende. Na qualidade de pró-reitor de pesquisa e pós-graduação da Unigranrio e representando o magnífico reitor, professor Arodi Cordeiro Erdi, eu gostaria inicialmente de dar os meus efusivos cumprimentos à comissão organizadora, capitaneada pelo professor Rezende e pelo coordenador da pós-graduação, do programa de pós-graduação em administração, por essa iniciativa de, hoje, aqui, praticamente iniciar as atividades do programa de doutorado da pós-graduação em administração. Eu acho que esse programa começa muito bem, porque escolheu um tema que é extremamente atual. Eu acho que gestão do conhecimento, eu acho que ativos intangíveis diz respeito a um leque enorme de disciplinas, talvez seja uma área de interdisciplinaridade das mais significativas. Eu posso dizer, inclusive, da minha área, que é a área de ciências da saúde. É só nós pensarmos o que significa hoje a patente, a quebra da patente em relação ao uso de medicamentos, e isso não deixa de ser um ativo legal, intangível. E, portanto, eu, mais uma vez, gostaria de parabenizar essa iniciativa e acho, professor Rui, que o seu programa de doutorado começa muito bem. Vi, inclusive, os participantes. Eu acho que essa interatividade, principalmente com as universidades de fora, inclusive de fora do Rio de Janeiro, é o ponto alto deste colóquio. Então, eu encerro aqui a minha fala, extremamente breve, porque nós temos, daqui a pouco, uma conferência internacional que vai acontecer dentro de alguns minutos, e passo a palavra ao professor Rui.
Muito bom dia a todos. Magnífico pró-reitor, representando o magnífico reitor, professor Emílio Francischetti, que tem, na pró-reitoria de pós-graduação em pesquisa, dado todo o apoio à implementação do doutorado, primeiro doutorado da Unigranrio, que conquistamos na área de administração. Esta oportunidade é muito significativa para nós, né? Talvez alguns estejam estranhando, porque não temos aqui um grande número de pessoas. O que acontecerá hoje, no período da tarde e amanhã, o dia todo, é porque tivemos que conciliar as aulas do nosso programa de pós-graduação com o início deste evento, porque tantos feriados às terças-feiras e também um maravilhoso seminário de pesquisa que tivemos na nossa universidade, que coincidiu com uma terça-feira. Então, nós não pudemos prejudicar o conteúdo das aulas que estão sendo ministradas hoje pela manhã, onde estão lá os professores e também os nossos alunos do mestrado. e alguns dos nossos participantes que estarão conosco hoje e amanhã. Mas eu quero ressaltar aqui, professor Emílio, e saudando toda a mesa, não é, que tem colaborado conosco muito na universidade, ressaltar o excelente trabalho realizado pelo professor José Rezende. O professor José Rezende foi o idealizador e é quem está no comando deste colóquio. Colóquio é esta oportunidade que nós vamos ter de, durante 2 dias, aprofundarmos os nossos estudos, discutirmos essa questão da gestão do conhecimento, capital intelectual e ativos intangíveis. A programação é de excelente nível e está de parabéns o professor Rezende, professor, pesquisador do nosso programa, também coordena um dos principais programas da universidade que tem a ver com o nosso programa de pós-graduação, de onde ele surgiu, que é o Mais Baixada, nossa preocupação com o desenvolvimento dos municípios da Baixada Fluminense. Muito se poderia falar, mas nós temos uma linha direta aí, realmente internacional, que fará a parte inicial deste programa, e eu quero só então registrar a minha gratidão como coordenador do PPGA ao professor José Rezende pela sua dedicação e à FAPERJ por ter apoiado este evento, né? Professor Rezende, receba aí a nossa congratulação, o nosso incentivo e, por certo, os resultados deste colóquio serão de muito significado, não só para o programa de pós-graduação em administração da nossa universidade, mas para a universidade como um todo. Temos aqui a pró-reitora de extensão, a nossa diretora de pesquisa, e os resultados, né, serão muito bem aproveitados, sem dúvida nenhuma. Parabéns, professor Rezende, e muito obrigado por esta oportunidade que nós temos de participar deste colóquio.
Eu passo a palavra agora ao professor Rezende.
Bom dia a todos. Permitam-me chamá-los a todos aqui da mesa e todos os nossos convidados e amigos. Quando nós começamos a pensar nesse encontro, propositalmente utilizamos a palavra colóquio, embora não seja uma palavra tão comum, mas pelo que ela significa, de tentar criar para todos nós que já estamos fazendo pesquisa nesse campo há algum tempo, um ambiente de conversa, de diálogo. Então, a todos vocês que receberam nossas comunicações desde o início, gostaríamos de reforçar uma vez mais o propósito desses nossos 2 dias de reunião, que é reunir pesquisadores e praticantes dentro dessa área de gestão do conhecimento, capital intelectual e ativos intangíveis, que, como muito bem lembrou o nosso pró-reitor, é uma área transversal, né, e, particularmente, eu acredito que o sucesso das instituições de ensino daqui para frente seja exatamente associado a essa capacidade de lidar com os assuntos transversais, né? Nós já temos uma série de cursos, profissões, campos de estudo muito bem desenhados, muito bem determinados do ponto de vista vertical, né? Temos verdadeiros silos, né, que precisam ser conectados, e a gente acredita que exatamente esse campo de pesquisa da gestão do conhecimento, da exploração do capital intelectual e da valoração dos ativos intangíveis é que vai exatamente criar essa costura entre os diversos ramos de conhecimento já estabelecidos e criar, então, essa interdisciplinaridade ou uma transdisciplinaridade a partir do qual, com certeza, a gente identifica possibilidades muito grandes de criação de valor. Então, para eu já poder convidar o nosso primeiro palestrante, que é o professor Goran Roos, da Universidade de Lund, da Suécia, e que estará conversando conosco diretamente de Riad, na Arábia Saudita, Gostaria, então, de agradecer a presença de vocês. Temos uma conferência que assim, é globalizada. Teremos gente falando de Riad, teremos gente falando da Alemanha, teremos gente falando da Califórnia, teremos gente falando da África do Sul, né? Isso aí para a gente foi um motivo de grande alegria conseguir envolver essa rede internacional de pesquisadores para estar conversando com a gente aqui. Então, eu gostaria que vocês aproveitassem esses 2 dias ao máximo e que daqui a gente pudesse aproveitar e trocar telefones, e-mails, para realmente criar uma nova rede de pesquisa a respeito desses 3 assuntos e de outros assuntos interrelacionados. Muito obrigado a todos.
Eu dou por encerrada a sessão.
Okay. All right. So I, of course, am very pleased to be with you. So and you can see my slides, I hope, in front of you? Yes. Good. All right. So what I thought I'd do is to talk a little bit about intellectual capital as I perceive it, and having together with Professor Leif Edvinsson been here a long while, I thought I might give you a little bit of a historical view. So basically, the intellectual capital, as we see it, has originated from the resource-based view of the firm, and that, of course, is a view that states that the firm's success is its ability to develop scarce resources that it can turn into some value that other people have difficulty imitate and to substitute. It also, of course, links to the knowledge-based view of the firm. Now, in order to do this, there is a need to develop a language, and this is one of the areas where the field of intellectual capital has struggled a little bit over time with its taxonomy and ontology. So if we move to slide number 3, the resource areas, there is some discrepancy around the names between different authors, but the concepts are still there. So the language that I tend to use talks about these 5 groups of resources. The monetary resources, which basically all of them can be have a tangible or intangible component. So, for example, monetary resources as a tangible is the money you have on the bank, and as an intangible would be the borrowing capacity that you have, for example. Physical resources, likewise, you can have a tangible thing like a machine, you can have an intangible one like a location of a building. You have relational resources, which is the relationships that the firm has with its stakeholders, and you have organizational resources, sometimes called structural capital, which is more or less processes, system, brands, and all those type of issues. And then finally, you have competence embodied in people, which we tend to call human resources. The reason we in the field tend to divide it in these 5 groups is that they behave economically different or use different measurement systems. So if I start with physical and monetary, their economic behavior is the same. It's diminishing marginal return. They're additive in nature, so if you use some of them, you have less left of them, but they are measured in different units. Unfortunately, we tend to call those different units the same thing. So money, of course, is measured in, for example, dollars. Physical resources tend to be measured in dollars too, but they are not the same dollars. One is real dollars and the other one is virtual dollars, because they are normally in the firm the result of a depreciation algorithm. And when you sell a machine that's depreciated, you will get some money for it. And I don't know what it is, but it's definitely not going to be the same amount as you have it for in your books. It can be more or it can be less, which illustrate the exchange rate problem between virtual money and real money, and the confusion that occurs because you tend to call one with the same name as the other. If we then look at the 2 ones in the middle, the organizational and the relational, they tend to follow network economic and if you put them to use, you do not know if you have more or less left of them. It is an unpredictable outcome. And finally, competence embodied in people follow the law of increasing marginal return, which means that if you have two people who know something about a subject and they enter into a dialogue, then both of them will have learned when the dialogue is over, but the knowledge distance between them will have increased. And that has some implications for how you manage those resources. So the key issue when you look about these things and you look at a firm or at a country from an intellectual capital point of view is that you have to subdivide these into some form of sub-resources that are meaningful, specifically if you're going to do measurements or calculations. And you normally depict that in some form of a distinction tree on which there is an example at the bottom of the slide. Now, this has all been about the resources that you have, and you may or may not care about that. If you are an accountant, you care a lot about it. If you're a manager, you don't tend to care very much about it. Because as a manager, you don't really care how much you have. You care what you get out of what you do have. So if we move to the next slide, there is something about resources and IC navigators. The issue here is that you need to understand the path that your value creation takes. Because the ability to create value in a firm is its ability to transform one resource type into another. For example, to take what is in the head of a competent person and bring that down to a recipe of some form that can be used to others. So the Navigator is a tool that I developed a number of years ago, and it's around the ability to map out transformation systems. And it shows how you as a firm go about to generate the value you go about to do. And there are some interesting measurements you can do about that. So if you move to the next slide, I will illustrate the transformation issues on the highest level. So if you look at these transformations, you can see that the raw headers, monetary, physical, relation, organization, human, from top to bottom, and that the column headings, monetary, physical, relation, organization, human, from left to right, are the same. So what we do is we start with one of the resources on the row headings, and we end up with one of the resources on the column header. So for example, in the first row, we commence with money. We end up with something else. For example, we can convert money to money by putting the money on bank and end up with a bit of interest plus what we originally had. So we have generated money out of money. And then we can use our money to buy something, so we end up with something physical. And then we can use our monetary issues to strengthen a relationship by taking somebody to lunch or something. We can use money to generate a system by investing in brand building or buying IT. We can use money to develop competence by paying a higher salary or recruiting somebody. Normally people have an intuitive understanding of this first row, so it's normally not a problem. The second row is when we start with a physical thing and end up with all the other ones. So we can convert physical to money. It is easy by selling a product. We can convert physical to physical by, for example, a chemical synthesis. So I have chemical A, a chemical B, I mix them up and I get a chemical C. We can have physical to relational. So I, for example, design an object, the form and shape of which is attractive to people, so they desire it. Classical example would be design, form and shape of the Apple phone, for example, by the way people look at it, or a luxury handbag like Hermes. I could also, in theory, use a chemical effect, so I can have the addictive effect of cigarettes or alcohol or something like that, and that strengthens the relationship between myself and the users of those things. Physical to organizational is the ability to give you a new machine that forces you to change the processes you have in your factory. And likewise, if I give you a new machine, then the operator has to learn something new, so it drives competence. The relational raw is very much about converting relationships to money, which you can do, for example, in shopping TV, where I own the TV channel and you produce pots and pans. I say to you, I have 8 million viewers. If you want to have access to those, you need to give me some money, and you can borrow the key to my studio for 20 minutes, and I don't care what you're doing there. So I have monetized the relationship I have through you. Relational to physical is when I use another company's assets. So for example, it would be that I am a small sub-supplier that produces a lot of things for you, and you're my dominating customer. You come to me and you say, I want you to make these 3 prototypes because I haven't decided which one to use. And at that point, I will give that one to you for free because I hope to get the order for the 1 million other ones. So that gives me an opportunity as a big player to leverage my relationship with you into a set of physical hardware. Relational to relational, that is word to mouth. In other words, I do something good for you, you tell your friend, or your friend come to me. And that's one of the classical issues in this domain. Relational to organizational is when I say to you, I'm the big boy, you are the small boy, and I say, I like to work with you, but you have very varying quality. So I will help you put in place my quality system so that you become a better sub-supplier to me. In other words, the relationship is converted into a process and a system. Relational to human is when we do a joint research project, for example, and learn together. Organizational to monetary is the extra money you can charge because you have a brand name on your product or on the patent or something. Organizational to physical, that is when you have a recipe in a sense or produce physical things based on that. Organizational to relationship is when you have a customer relationship management system that works and strengthens the relationship. Organizational to organization is when you have a system that generates IP automatically, for example. Organization to human is when you develop competence through use. For example, when you buy a Microsoft Office pack the first time and you switch it on, the system will say to you, would you like me to teach you how to use me? In other words, it's computerized learning. So it's a system that develops competence. Human to monetary, that is when you sell competence in the form of man hours. Human to physical is when the guy develops a prototype. Human to relational is when your sales guy meets somebody for the first time and they develops a relationship that lasts. Human to organizational is me writing down how to do something so you can do it. And human to human is apprenticeship or training. So that very quick run through is purely to illustrate that all transformations are possible. But in a given company, they are not all relevant. So the purpose of the transformation analysis is to understand which of these transformations are being used and how important are they for the firm's value creation. And if you do that, it makes it possible for you to do an analysis. And if you move to the next page, you will find the book in which all this is written. But if you look at the right, you will find 2 graphs in which you can then plot these resources once you've made that analysis. And it allows you to identify in the firm resources that are underutilized. In other words, you invest more in them than you get back. Resources that are overutilized. In other words, you extract an enormous amount of value from them, but you don't sustain them by investing in them. And resources that are balanced use. In other words, you get enough out of them to pay for what you put in for them, plus a little bit extra. And the resources that are more important gives you a higher return than those that are less important. So it is one of the few techniques that exist to actually analyze from a resource-based viewpoint of view the resource deployment system in an organization and to indicate where problems are and where these things can be done. So that is the principal issue of understanding it from a strategic point of view. One of the domains in intellectual capital that received a lot of attention is measurement, and as a consequence of that, reporting. So I will talk a little bit about those 2. New to the next slide, which has a set of very nice formula on it. So what we need to understand is why we want to measure things and how we measure things. And normally we want to measure things to understand that if we get good value out of them and if other people value what we have. And this is critical if you're going to have a disclosure statement. And I'll come back to why a lot of that has failed in a second. So if we go to the next slide, has a funny triangle on it. Before we measure, we need to understand what it is we are looking for. And in any measurement situation, we are trying to measure value. And the first thing we have to realize is that value comes in 3 flavors, and we tend to forget 2 of them. The first one we spend a lot of time measuring is value derived from deploying the offering. In other words, a pen is useful to me because I can write with it, and I don't necessarily care who produced it or what color it has. I'm solely looking for its instrumental use and hence its instrumental value. The most extreme dimension of that is money. So most people want money because they can use it to buy other things, not because they collect it in its own right. So this is normally the one we focus on. So when we try to communicate with our friends, the accountants, we tend to end up locking ourselves into this 1/3 of the potential value space. And that is very dangerous. Between a lot of our behaviors, as we all know who studied behavioral economics, is driven by other things than the rational. So if we look at the second one, what we call intrinsic value, this is derived from having something, not because you can use it. So if your 3-year-old daughter give you a drawing that she made on your birthday, and you get that as a present, you will consider that very valuable. Now, if you put that on eBay and try to sell it, you're not going to get a lot of money for it. And the reason is that it doesn't have any instrumental value to others. That does not stop it from being valuable to you, because for you it has intrinsic value. It is worth something because of what is in itself. You will find this in business situations when people buy things that contains features that they want to have, but they never intend or are able to use. The final third of the value space is what we call extrinsic value. It's valuable to me because it is valuable to you. The scenario here is very typical of that, for example, a politician. A politician will value what the electorate value, and when the electorate changes its opinion, so will the politician normally. In other words, the sole value something has to me is that you value it. So when we're going to capture the value of something, we have to capture the value in all 3 dimensions. Now, in a business-to-business situation, on average, 80% of the value sit in the instrumental third, where 20% sit in the other 2. In a business-to-consumer